Here we go. So we will, I'm just started recording right now, and we will send this out to everybody afterward. So if you do have to drop off for any reason, you will be able to catch the full thing.
We want to get started.
We're still getting a couple people. So let's
Okay.
get one more minute.
Sure.
And then we will get started. Let me see what I have here. Yeah, I think we'll give it one more minute. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. We're thrilled to have all of you here with us today. This is our new revamped Empowered Hour. We had officially kicked off Empowered Hour as 1 hour coffees and training, individual training sessions a few months ago, but then we got some feedback that people really felt that they wanted to be educated on a specific topic and really get a robust amount of information regarding that topic. So today we are thrilled to re-kick off our Empowered Hour with an end of year webinar where we are going to talk about all things end of year and communications. We have two phenomenal guests with us here today, Allegra and Cheryl, are two women that the Empowered team has worked with over the last year and a half. And we are so excited to have them here today. You are all in for a special treat. We have been working really hard with the two of them over the last few weeks to put this together, and they are a wealth of information. My colleague, Alyssa Burrs, is going to be the facilitator of Empowered Hour. I'm Stephanie Pasisweil. I should actually introduce myself to all of you. If you don't know me, I am the Chief Empowerment Officer of Empowered Nonprofits, and I'm thrilled to have all of you here today. For those of you who just joined a little later, a couple of housekeeping things to note. One is we are recording the session. So if you do have to drop off for any reason, we will be sending this out to you afterwards. Number two is if you have any questions, you can use the chat function. You can either send it directly to me, you can send it to the group. We will be monitoring that for the Q&A at the end. We will be monitoring that. So don't worry. We'll try to get to all of your questions. If we can't, then maybe we'll follow up with you afterwards with some answers to your questions. So, but we'll try to get to everybody. And also just keep yourself muted during the webinar. If I do hear somebody come off of mute, I might, and it's disturbing the group, then I will maybe mute you or ask you all to mute. And then the final thing is that it would be great to have you in speaker, to put at the top of your screen, you have the view, click over to speaker view so you can see the individual who is speaking during the presentation. And I think that's everything. Alyssa, did I cover it?
You covered everything.
Okay, great. Well, enjoy.
Very good.
Thank you for being here. I'm going to hand it over to our team.
Very good. Thank you. As Stephanie mentioned, I am Alyssa. I work with her at Empowered Nonprofits. I'm a senior empowerment officer, and we just love being able to connect, with all of you, connect you with each other. So we're really happy and appreciative that you're able to join us today. And of course, very appreciative and thankful to have Allegra and Cheryl. So Allegra Mangione is the founder of Catharsis, and she works through mission-based consulting to help her nonprofit organizations. And Cheryl is a principal and co-founder of Growth Brands, and she is just a wonderful partner and connector. So we're really happy to have both of them here today. I'm going to click forward here if this lets me. So we are going to cover a few topics. So our main goals today, we're going to walk you through goal setting and measurable metrics, campaign strategy and audience segmentation, messaging and storytelling, tactics, tools, and timelines. I know some of the questions we got in advance were in regards to tactics and timelines, so hopefully that'll be really helpful for all of you. And then retaining and engaging your donors. So those are kind of the key points we're highlighting. As Stephanie mentioned, along the way, if you have any questions, type them in the chat box. You can send them to her, to me, to the full group. We will be monitoring it. And as I mentioned, we did get some questions in advance. So we've kind of peppered those throughout the presentation where they make sense. But again, as anything comes up on your end, let us know and we're happy to answer them either along the way or you can follow up with us. We can follow up with you, after the presentation. So again, these are the topics we're going to cover. And we're going to start with goal setting and measurable metrics. So I am going to throw it over to Cheryl to begin educating us on how we can start thinking about our end of year, planning for this year and looking back at previous years as well.
All right. Thank you, Alyssa. And thank you everyone for being here with us to be empowered, right? And we're going to start with indeed goal setting and measurable metrics. So we're going to take it in kind of two parts. Before we can begin, I like to always say we have to look back, then look ahead, right? If we look back at prior year and we come to, and I'm going to encourage you, and many of you I know do this probably in your sleep, encourage you to come to that end of the year planning meeting, kickoff meeting, equipped with everything you can possibly have imagined and everything you learned from the prior year. You want to think about your goals as really being metric driven, right? Kind of units of measure. And we'll talk about some examples in a minute, but they ought to be answers to the kind of questions like, how much did we raise last year? Did we reach a goal? Presuming we set one. Why or why not? What might we have done differently? And I think each of you might be thinking, and if you're brave and want to share, I'd ask you to share in the chat, lessons learned, right? So we kind of think about as we work as marketing and development professionals and leaders of organizations, right? Let's keep pushing for excellence. Let's keep doing more. Let's find out what's possible this year. So lessons learned are an important tool. I'll give you a pro tip that you probably know, but I'll ask you to just think about too. As we experience end of year planning this year, if we haven't yet created a little file off to the side where we write down the things we're learning as we go, do that. Because when we come to this time of year where we want to look back at prior years, we don't want it to be hard, right? So pull the data, come to that meeting really equipped. Any lessons learned? If we got anything, or Allegra or Lissa, anything comes to mind? Because I can share one otherwise.
I have a question from earlier, but why don't you
please
share and then I'll give you the question that was submitted.
Okay. Well, I was going to merely share that experience I had with a client a number of years ago, and I was a volunteer too, where we just expected the same amount we brought in every year was the best we could do, right? And it wasn't for lack of desire to do better. It was just we didn't really think we could because we just never had. So it took somebody kind of stepping up and wanting to match a gift. And suddenly we had, 2x what we had. And that lit the fire, right? So, looking around and really thinking about what's achievable sometimes takes conversations, talk to those you work with and set goals accordingly.
And Allie just mentioned that attrition rate was high and it was hard to recapture one-time opportunity gifts.
That's tough, right? Particularly if that one-time gift is tied to a particular event that might have been pre-COVID, or might have been, related to the speaker, if there was a gala or an online event, right? And if that relationship is there, and the keys to that, and we'll get into some of it in tactics. And I know Allegra's going to cover for us in planning and strategy and segmentation, but you really want to understand, you want to build those relationships right throughout. I can hop to measurable goals. Couple of things, right? I like to call it unit of measure, right? The way that you measure. It's either a dollar figure, it's a count, it's a growth rate, and it's got to have meaning, right? And it's obviously got to be something that you can measure. So think about total dollars raised among repeat donors. Maybe it's a goal against a particular segment or a particular, an acquisition goal, right? Somebody that's never given before. Maybe it's lapsed donors, right? We call those win backs sometime. Like, let's win back those that have forgotten about us. So think about it all and go into that meeting, talking strategy and talking segmentation and planning well before tactics, with a look at that prior year.
Absolutely. And the question that we got in advance was, when should you begin your end of year campaign, and what should be the cadence for solicitation through the end of the year? So we'll get to more of the timeline piece a little bit later, but we timed this webinar really around the time we would want you to start thinking about your end of year. So end of September, beginning of October is really a great time. Of course, if you want to start planning earlier, also great, but this is a really nice time to reflect on, what has happened so far during the year and put together a really beautiful piece for your end of year. And then as far as the solicitation cadence, and Allegra and Cheryl jump in, but we typically recommend sending out the first communication right after Thanksgiving so that people get it, right the first week of December, if you're going to send something over mail or even email, and then following up with e-blasts, with individual outreach. And we'll get more into that when we talk about segmentation, but just following up in a cadence based on, what level of donors, because it's likely not realistic that you are following up individually with everyone on your list, but having those follow-up e-blasts, deciding who you're going to have conversations with leading up to the end of the year. And then also just kind of an additional point on that is I wouldn't even say through 12/31. I would, if you can, run your end of year through January 15th, even the end of the month, and just allow people to send those gifts in towards the end of the year. Sometimes people are out of town, they have things going on for the holidays. So just kind of set that date if you have the flexibility to do that a little bit past the end of the year, just to get, kind of the straggler gifts in as well.
Totally. And can I just jump in, Alyssa, that I think that's great guidance, kind of the right after Thanksgiving. But if you're planning around Giving Tuesday, which is typically the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, you'll want to start your communications even earlier. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about when to start sending out those donor communications.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Allegra.
Fiscal year planning also, right? There may be other times of the year.
Exactly.
When, so we're calling it end of year, but it can be end of your year. It can be, it can be next spring. Planning always earlier is better. We're here to tell you it's not too late. So we like to look at the positive. We know we got this. We know you got this. But I think all those points are really based on kind of what your goals are and what you're looking to achieve and when.
Yes. And I saw that Terry had commented about the suggestion for timing after Thanksgiving. So I'm guessing that means earlier. And of course, you want to begin planning earlier right now, which is why we're having this conversation. That would be, typically what we discuss as a first touch point. Of course, if that's, feels too tight of a timeline for you, do what works for you. But as far as, building out the timeline from today goes, that's a reasonable and attainable goal that we, often set for our clients. But of course, take that recommendation with what works for you. And if it feels a little too late, then of course, get your letters out a little bit earlier. Okay, so we talked about setting our goals. Now Allegra is going to help us think through really going through the campaign strategy and audience segmentation. I think we've also had some questions submitted around that. So after we get through that, we can talk through some questions you had in advance and, keep sending in your questions as well.
Great, thanks, Alyssa. Yeah, so when I think about campaign strategy for a year-end campaign, there are 3 key things that I really consider. Cheryl did a great job of going over goals, and that's definitely the first thing you want to do is set those goals. But the next thing, and I think what's really central to any campaign, and Cheryl touched on it when she talked about building relationships, is to center your campaign around the audiences that you are trying to reach. So ask yourself, like, who are my audiences? What do I know about my donors, about my volunteers, about the different types of folks I want to engage this year in my campaign? And what am I trying to get them to do? And this might be different for different audience segments. So I want to pass it to Cheryl and kind of ask, because she's an expert here with segmentation. So besides just overall having an idea of our audiences, Cheryl, what are the different ways we can segment out our audience strategically for a year-end campaign?
Mm-hmm. And certainly you want to consider kind of who they are and what about your mission and what about your organization really connects with them. And that past performance, right? So a couple of different ways to segment, certainly gift level is a really common place to start. You think about how you're going to message according to, where they have given or where you believe they have given the research that you're doing. Is it a first gift? Is it a repeat gift? We've had the question, and it's a really good one. What if they just gave? Maybe you'll share with us too, Allegra, what we do, right? But the different giving, and then also kind of programmatic, even generational. So programmatic meaning if your mission is about housing, and that's really what that particular donor, given their engagement, whether it's in events or giving, has been that, go ahead and lead perhaps with that message. Maybe it's hunger, it's whatever it is. But develop strategy around, what is that interest? Generational, young, old, geographic, all kinds of ways that might be relevant.
And I would say also one step further from that, finding maybe a common connector in whatever your mission is. So maybe your mission is housing, but that common connection is, individuality or independence or something that everyone can relate to, and not just someone who is only interested in housing. And that way you can, send it to your more peripheral folks who may or may not have given in a while, what Cheryl referred to as win backs earlier. And maybe that gets them engaged even further, just to highlight, a story of someone who refound their independence because of the mission that your housing organization is working towards.
Totally. That's a really great example, Alyssa, and we'll get into that too around how can we get to those core values or emotions that really get a more universal audience interested in your work as well. But the next thing to think about after audience, and thank you, Cheryl, for that, the kind of describing the many ways you could think about audience segmentation. The next thing to think about is kind of what platforms or modalities are you going to be using for your campaign? So there's a lot available to us. There's social media. And when we think about social media, really thinking through what are the social media platforms that we're on, and where do we have the biggest following that's the most engaged? And so don't just think, okay, we're just going to put this on social media, but think like, what is our Instagram strategy versus our Facebook strategy versus our LinkedIn strategy? Because all of those are going to look a little different. You can think about mail, kind of print letters and mailed letters as a tactic. You can think about phone, you can think about email. So what are all the different ways that we're going to reach out to donors, and how are they going to work together? And I just wanted to put a note here too. A lot of the clients that I work with get worried about bombarding their donors with too much information. And we know from kind of research that, to really get a message to stick, you need quite a few different touch points. And so it's great if you can know where your donors are, know what social media they're using, know if they're in there, if they like mail, if they like email, and then kind of get your message out in multiple ways to the same donor is a really strategic way to do it. And then the last piece that I always like to think about for a year-end campaign is who can you engage to amplify your message? So your organization has advocates and supporters. That might be your board members. It could be volunteers. It could be staff members. It could be longtime donors who would be excited about serving as ambassadors for this campaign. So what I would encourage you to do is really think through who you could invite into your campaign, and how are you going to help them be successful at championing your cause. So they have their own networks and they can go out and ask folks to contribute, but you can give them the tools to help them make that a reality. So that might be look like giving them a messaging guide. It could be using an online fundraising platform and having them set up their own giving pages, which they can then share out on email and social media. But what I like to do is host an info session or a training to really get all your volunteers who are going to be part of the campaign together and get their questions answered, get them on the same page, run it like you would any other volunteer opportunity, and then continue to check in with those volunteers throughout the campaign to offer your support and getting them the resources they need, and also to celebrate them and celebrate the successes of the campaign of their collective efforts. So I love to do a weekly email with all my volunteers who are part of the campaign saying, we raised this much this week thanks to these specific volunteers that really put a lot of time and effort in. We're going to reach our goal. This is, we really want everyone to keep going and keep being involved, and, really engaging those outside folks who might not be in your development department can make a huge difference in the success of your campaign.
I would add too. Oh,
go ahead.
Sorry,
Tara.
Alyssa. I just wanted to add pizza. If you pizza or brownies, it was great, Allegra, right? Just create that energy around it, show gratitude, but give them a reason to come together and be part of getting the work done too.
That's always a good incentive for volunteers, for sure. I was just going to say, don't kind of give up, for lack of a better word, in the last couple of days, right? Like, I have a client I previously worked with and managed their annual fundraising for them. So had a really large role in their end of year campaign. And we encourage their board members, their close supporters and friends in the last days. I think it was like right after Christmas through New Year. So it was really the last 3 days of the year. And we sent a list and said, these are all of the people who donated last year or the year before, but we haven't heard from yet. Like, who's going to call them? And we had, probably a list of 20 people they called. And I think just from those phone calls that they made in the last 3 days, they got
like $10,000 or $12,000. So really just picking up the phone in those last few days of the year and just touch pointing, all of those people who have donated to you in the past, but for whatever reason haven't yet this year. And you'll, I think, be surprised by how many people will take that call. Anything else? Or am I going ahead?
Good.
I can't hear.
As we're going ahead, I'll just add that I saw a great example from a client the other day of an email with, I called it a little bit of bravery and some great authenticity, but she's a board member and she wrote, I don't so much fundraise. That's not my thing, but this is important enough, and it was this really kind of touching piece that, made you read. And she was sharing with me from the year prior. And it worked. People that she might not have heard from, found it's some resonance in it.
Absolutely.
All right.
Just the last thing I want to say about this is when you're segmenting, and it depends how big your list is and what your internal staff capacity is. And there are a lot of factors, but the more you can personalize, the better your outcome is going to be. So if you can personalize your letter to dear Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, or first names, whatever level of formality you're typically used to, if you can include their past year gift and say you gave $1,000 in 2020, would you be willing to increase your gift this year? Really can go a long way without having too much effort in like pulling their last year's gift and then saying like, would you give this much more? You can just say, would you be willing to give more? And that often has a really nice return. So any way you can really personalize that, right? Get their name on the envelope, of course, get their name in the letter, put their giving amount in. And then someone had asked how to segment in regards to giving levels. So I think, it's a couple different things, right? You can choose to send certain level donors a letter in the mail. You can decide to follow up with the highest level donors with a phone call, or even, as I mentioned a little bit ago, any outstanding donors with a phone call. You can choose to send some people letters, some people only emails. But I would also add, again, this depends on your internal capacity. But oftentimes what organizations will do is create two versions of the letter. And one of those versions will include giving levels at higher amounts. And then one of those letters will include giving levels at lower amounts. So any donors you have like $1,000 and under, give them options, from your lowest amount up to 1,000. And then donors that typically give more than that, you can kind of give them higher level options as well. So again, depends on your capacity and how much time and planning you have to put into this, but that's another option also. So as far as the messaging and storytelling goes, that's really the bulk of your letter, right? That's where we're getting the emotion. That's where we're, portraying and getting everybody involved in our mission and what our goals are. So Allegra is going to talk us through building a really nice piece and how to tell your story through that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is my favorite part. This is really when we have the opportunity to be creative with our campaign development. And kind of the framework for this is that stories are often the most powerful thing you can do in a year-end campaign, is tell your organization's stories in a compelling way. So when I look to put together a campaign, thinking about the year-end letter, but also, everything that's happening on social media, the emails that we're sending out, kind of how all those pieces are working together, I like to center those around one theme. And so coming up with a theme is sometimes the most exciting part of there are a lot of exciting parts, but it's one of the most exciting parts of putting together a year-end campaign. And so what I like to tell organizations is, if they've been around for a while and their supporters know what their mission is and are kind of used to getting similar messaging, that the year-end campaign is a great time to come up with a theme that's related to your mission and really ties into your brand, but is new for your donors. Note here, if you're a super new organization and you're just working on trying to get the word out about who you are and what you do, it might be good to kind of really align your campaign messaging just with who your organization is. But if you've been around for a while, this is your time to be a little bit creative. And so to develop that theme, I like to really center it around, ask myself the question, what emotion motivates my donors to give? And to find out the answer, you can call them up. You can call up a few donors, have a conversation, ask them why they give, and really listen to what they say and listen for that emotion behind what they're saying. And then pull out that emotion and come up with a theme that helps invoke that emotion as a motivation to get your donors to give. And then, of course, from there, once you have your theme, all the stories that you tell as part of your campaign relates back to your theme. And a note on storytelling, I think the most successful campaigns center stories instead of centering the ask and then telling a story kind of as an afterthought. And so I'm going to give you kind of a real world example that I worked on a few years ago, kind of to give color to this whole process. So I worked for an organization that was a family resource center, and their mission was to build better communities by strengthening families. And so when we were thinking about our year-end campaign, we asked ourselves and we asked our donors, what motivates them to give? And what we got was hope, that they feel that, the organization served a lot of immigrant and refugee families, and there was a lot of hope within our organization for a better future for these families. And so when thinking about hope as an emotional response, what type of theme can we have that invokes hope? And what we came up with was dreams. And so we built a campaign with a theme of dreams. And so you can see here, this is Iker. He's a child in the early childhood education program. And so kind of our campaign slogan was invest in me today, help my dreams come true tomorrow. And, we got to know Iker and his mom. We interviewed his mom, and she told her story really compellingly about like why she, is hopeful for Iker's future. And then we didn't just stop there. We ended up identifying different community members who participate in our programs in different ways and telling their stories too. So this is Erica. And so Erica had a dream of owning her own food business, of having a food truck. And so she went through our food incubator program, and she transformed her grandmother's recipes into recipes that could be sold from a food truck. And then, got the guidance and mentorship for that, kind of got training and all the skill sets she needed to both run a business and particularly a food business, and then got the seed funding to launch her truck. And now she's in Aurora, Colorado. You can, beef birria is her specialty. It's delicious. And so we told the story about Erica and how through our programs, through our donor support, she was able to make her dream come true. And then the last story we told, was Jose, and I love this one. Jose is a Spanish speaker, and he told us that the reason why he takes English class with this organization is because he wants to be able to make his children proud, that he wants to show them that he can learn a second language. He wants to be there at their doctor's appointments and communicate with their doctors. He wants to be in that parent-teacher conference and be able to communicate with their teachers. And so we had all these amazing stories from the organization, and we were able to pull them together around a central theme. And then that did the work for us, right? Then that inspires the donors, motivates them to give. They can see how their dollars are making a difference. And so that's what I'd really encourage you to do. And I'd love to hear from you, and I see it I'd love to talk about this too, this message from Karen in the chat around kind of using stories, and we can think about how we can tell stories ethically too, but I'd love to hear from you of some stories that have come out from your organization that you have found really compelling or have resonated with donors, and then maybe so we can have folks type them out, and I can take a stab at Cheryl's comment, or Karen's comment, and Cheryl and Alyssa, if you want to jump in on this, you're more than welcome to as well. But this idea of we don't want to use kids' stories. I think it's really around how you are telling stories and how you're working with your community members to tell their stories in ways that they really feel like represents them and they're excited about sharing with the world. So it's definitely not about just being in your development department and thinking who would be good and then kind of going out interviewing them and not being clear about what it's going to be used for. For me, I like to really connect with our program staff and ask them, who's part of our organization who have talked to you about how much this organization has meant to you, who have maybe said oh, is there anything I can do to give back? And kind of go with those participants. Yeah, Stephanie put in the chat too, that are really interested in sharing their stories with the world. Obviously get parental consent if any children's videos or images are going to be shared. You can always, your community members sometimes ask to be anonymous. You can always do it anonymously as well. So there are a lot of different ways to really be thoughtful about making sure that your values are built into the way that you're telling stories.
I think Jennifer just put in the chat, I think that's a really important point. Like if your mission revolves around children, empowering children, supporting them, elevating them in some way, then that is critical to your fundraising, right? If you're using children, to Karen's point, and it's a little bit peripheral or not the direct mission, then I think that's where the waters can get a little muddy on that. But if your mission is, focused on children, or children are part of your mission, it's, as Jennifer said, I think it's critical as well.
Mhm. Yeah.
The other thing, Allegra, I just wanted to point out about your stories that you shared here is that each of the images looked a little bit different. And I think when we spoke, and I want to go back here, like how this had the little lower third here with the Focus Points Family Resource Center. So I believe you and I talked about it, that these were just used in different ways, right? So some were in written communications and others were in electronic communications.
Mhm. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So these kind of cover photo sized ones were in emails. And then that first one you saw was actually a postcard that was mailed out to donors.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'd add too, think video when you have maybe budget, or even if you're using your iPhone, to give sight, sound, emotion to a story is really compelling. I worked with a client not long ago for their annual meeting to capture really beautiful client story. And it was, as Stephanie wrote in the chat, a client who wants to share, is in a very similar kind of organization, is on the other side and wants others to know how the organization can help. So what began as capturing video for this annual meeting allowed us to do my very favorite thing, which is repurposing and using it authentically and I think strategically and pretty smart in pull quotes and in little video snippets in social media, in email, and think about it as an integrated campaign. Just Allegra, as you're pointing out.
Wonderful. So moving into tactics, tools, and timelines, Cheryl is going to walk us through a creative brief. And another question we got, Cheryl, I'm not really sure where you want to answer it, but is just about creating catchy subject lines. So I thought maybe now, or when we talk about the testing, would be a good spot, but I just wanted to make sure we hit on that as well.
Great. Yes, we are going to get to testing in a minute, but I'll answer it quick and say collaboration, I think, is both the answer and the most fun. So whether it be for a subject line, a headline, a subhead, a closing line, I think really, and let me stick maybe just to kind of headlines and subject lines for a minute. I think it's tossing out ideas and kind of playing with the words, those that might love words and those that might not think they know or how to write or like to write could come at it with a really good idea. So I like to say, here are 6, 7, 8 variations of subject lines and get people's reactions and kind of get a winner. And then we love to test, which is what we'll talk about.
All right.
Okay. Creative. I'm going to call it a creative brief. We could also call it a project brief, right? Its intent is to give the recipient of the information, so call it a designer, a copywriter, that's really going to manage the expression of what that beautiful emotion is, what that story is that you want to tell into year. You got to write it down. Right? I mean, we say it, and then sometimes, we're our own worst enemy because we don't have time, and we just pull a group together and we try to get through it, and then we may not get back the work that truly expresses what we're after. So, in a really simple, high-level way, name your project, give it a name, and be clear about what the objective is. I like to tell individuals in marketing departments and clients when I work with them, that the more we can tell the story of what we're trying to accomplish, not only does it help the creative, I'll say in this purpose or in this example, but it also shows respect, right? Nobody wants to be told, make it pink. I'd like green headlines, and this is beautiful. But this was developed based on what we're trying to say and what we're trying to do. So let's do that for our creatives, give them as much as we can. Who do we want to engage? Give them those audiences, right? Details. And this I'd really call copy points. You don't have to be a writer, but what's the message you're looking to convey? What are some of the words that you want included? Give them a reason to give. And definitely, if there's any program details, get all that in there up front, because that affects design. If there's some kind of information the recipient, no matter what modality, would get. Call to action, the CTA. What do we want them to do? Is it, and I'm pulling from a little bit of digital in this example, but it's true in print and it's true when we speak, right? Do we want them to call now? Click here, get involved, please help, learn more. Whatever that call to action is really important, that you specify and that you brainstorm around. And when does it have to go live? And then let's make sure we do.
And about the details you mentioned, like using the specific words and things that are eye-catching, oftentimes what we like to do is highlight certain words or phrases to make them stand out a little bit more. So, of course, a shorter, I will say letter, because you don't want it to be too short, but a shorter letter is going to be read, probably by more people than a longer letter, but especially highlighting the key points. So it doesn't only have to be the call to action, but if you want to highlight someone's name and what they've done or how it relates to your mission or how you've impacted them, like highlighting those little pockets of information as well as the call to action ensures that even if someone's not reading the full letter, they're reading the pieces that you really need them to read.
Right. Yep. And imagery too, right? So depending on what that look feel is, if it's print, certainly if it's digital, copy and imagery, more people read pictures than they do copy, and yet we've got to use the words and we've got to get them in. But yeah, imagery helps. And SEO, I know that's a whole nother category, but exactly what you said, Alyssa, is true on the web. If we authentically write with the words we want to own when someone's searching. So they're searching, mission-driven organizations that are all about better financial futures, like an organization Allegra you shared with us. So you want to really use those words in a way that will be understood to people looking for you. We can go on to tactics, kind of keep the schedule. I know we're getting close, friends. Y'all been wonderful audience and participants. So we're going to stay with the T's. I love alliteration. So tactics, tools, and timelines. And I want to focus on testing. Often organization, we've all maybe said this, been there, maybe we don't think we have the time. We know what works. Well, that's what we've always done. Or we know what works because last year we earned $5,000 or whatever it is, right? But unless we test to learn, we really don't know what would work best. So using A/B testing, also called often, right, test and control, you can truly learn, test, kind of rinse, repeat. So think about it as changing one variable and keeping everything else the same. So A is your test. It is what we want to do. We want to look at new copy. We want to look at some subject lines after we've brainstormed. We want to look at design or color or that call to action, and change it for a segment of your population. It doesn't have to be a lot, 5-10%, something that just gives you a read, ideally statistically significant, but a read on what works versus the control, which is what you want everybody to get. And the reason you want everyone to get it is it worked last time, right? So you're testing against what you know has worked historically. You can test, email, we're suggesting copy and subject lines with a little asterisk. We didn't mean to give you homework, but Googling the new Apple iOS 15 and some of their the challenges they're creating for email platforms is a really good idea. At least until email platforms figure it out, there could be some inflation around the open rates. Open rates, just to mention quick, is but one metric, right? We really want action. We really want conversion and, and longevity of giving. But that said, open rate's the first. Just be careful as you're testing here in the days to come. Test donation amounts, and by that, I mean kind of two things. If big givers, medium, small givers, we are grateful for all of them, might resonate with a different message, try that, right? As well, donation amounts that you might feature from, what Allegra was saying before, the amounts that you may go up, that Alyssa mentioned too. Measure, find, and do that repeat. Sequence, really important, right? As you test, as you learn, as you roll out this great work across all these different, channels, marketing channels, you want to think about the way to sequence it to not overwhelm and to be sure to give life to the campaign. So the direct mail letter may drop with its reply envelope. Board members are involved. Let's say you've had an event with the pizza and they've signed with clean hands those personalized notes. Just a little note about checking the insertion order if you're doing print. Most mail houses, will ask us if we're new, how we want it to be inserted. What do we want the typical way it opens to present? But not always, right? So we want to specify that. We want to check with them that they're going to load it just as we'd specify. Email follow-ups, we've mentioned, right, with embedded video or quotes, even a series of them. Let's talk digital, because if you're putting something in the mail and someone's going to see your URL, they're going to come to your homepage. We hope they will. That's a way to engage. Is there a promotion on the homepage? Is there an ask? Is there a beautiful landing page with that same look and feel that brings to life that end of year campaign and gets you to a donation page? Be sure you think about that. Carry it through to social, amplify, like Allegra said. And definitely, I love Alyssa's phone call example, right? End of the year, don't give up. Let's call. Did you get it? Haven't heard from you. Want to see what you think. Ask your support. You've been so wonderful. So that's a little bit of testing and kind of sequencing and learning and plowing back through and continuing to do it.
Very good. And then I know there are a lot of questions and interest around our timeline. So
and tracker
through this.
Yeah. This is just one format to keep us straight, to keep us aligned, and we'll send it to you as a follow-up, but it's just the notion of elements as you're planning and as you're going. Really write that down. There's an example there for you of, your description, your status. Where are you this week? What are next steps? By when? Who's responsible? Give them a name. And then, stay on it, keep it updated. And I find, and my clients have shared that it keeps us accountable, right? It gives us work that we can keep doing.
And the one thing I would add to this is just work backwards, right? If you know that you want to send your letter on November 27th, I'm not sure the exact day of Thanksgiving this year, so that's probably it. But if you want to send your letter on a certain day, work backwards from that as to when you need a first draft, when you need a second draft, when it needs to be approved, when it needs to go to the mail house. If you need it back so that you can insert handwritten notes into them, then you're going to need more time for that, right? So just working backwards, I think, is the most helpful way to build this out, and kind of segment it based on, your mailed communication, if you're doing that, versus your electronic communication. You just have a little bit more wiggle room with, sending an electronic communication than relying on the mail to get your mailed letter out. So that's how I like to build my timelines. And the last thing we want to discuss is retaining and engaging your donors.
Yeah, absolutely. So for acknowledgement and stewardship, so these need to be thought about and built into your campaign from the beginning. The most important piece of advice I have here is make a plan and be ready to activate your plan during campaign implementation. So gifts are going to start coming in, and you're going to still have to be sending out those asks and doing your social media campaigns and doing your email campaigns, and also thanking donors as gifts come in. So it can get, as I'm sure all of you know, very, very busy, but a well thought out plan helps streamline it a bit, and hopefully will take some of the work off your plate as the person managing the campaign. So that's when we start thinking about, what are those, we again go back to segmentation. Who is going to get thanked how? And a lot of folks like to do this by donation amount. You could also think creatively about how to do this by age group or by what program they donated to or something like that. But think about who's going to get thanked and how, those donation levels. And this is a great place to involve your board and your team of volunteers and perhaps staff members who aren't in the development department who have volunteered to help as well. There are a lot of different ways you can thank donors, as I'm sure you all know. You can pick up the phone and do a phone call. That often goes a long way. You can thank donors in an email. You can send out a letter. You could be really creative about it and put together a video. One time I donated to an organization and they were small and just getting kind of their first round of donors in their year-end campaign. And so they actually had board members make personalized videos to each donor above a certain threshold. And they're just 30 seconds long saying thank you. They're emailed over. I thought that was really great. So there are a lot of different ways you can thank, but you want to make sure you know how you're going to thank whom and how you're going to get those out in a timely way. One, I see there's like a conversation about letters going on in the chat. One thing to always know is that donations over a certain amount do need tax receipts. And so those, some of our kind of our giving software auto generates those, but it's always great to follow up to make sure your donor knows that they have a tax receipt either by mail or by email, depending on what your donors prefer. And then the last piece here is thinking about, so we don't have those lapsed donors who give once for your campaign because their friend asked them, but then kind of just forget about your organization in the new year. Thinking about how you're going to re-engage your donors in 2022. And I think it's great to find ways that aren't necessarily about giving money, but being part of the organization in different ways. So that could look like inviting your new donors from the campaign to a volunteer opportunity in the spring of 2022. It could be having a certain event where donors can meet each other and network in 2022, but thinking about like, how are we going to keep these donors involved in our organization and deepen our relationship with them that isn't necessarily transactional, but is really kind of building what are the different platforms and ways we can use to build an authentic relationship with our donors in the long term. I'll stop there and hand it back to you, Alyssa. And I think it's time for questions, right?
Yeah, so that is everything we wanted to cover. I know we have about 5 minutes left and I want to make sure we're respectful of everyone's time. And I know we've had a robust chat and you've all been engaged, which has been great. So thank you for participating. And if you have any additional questions right now, if you want to unmute and ask them, if you want to throw them in the chat, either one is fine by us. Yes, Stephanie, I see your point. So I would not recommend only the automatic thank you from a CRM. If someone donates through your website, of course, the automatic thank you will go through. But I think it was with Allegra and Cheryl, we were talking about this. I personally kind of, when I get those automated responses, it comes, 30 seconds after you make the donation. And it's like, did somebody even see this? Are they going to know, especially if I've done it in honor of someone or in memory of someone? So it is really nice to also receive, even if it's just an email acknowledgement. But I don't really love when that's the only touch point of an acknowledgement is the automatic process one. And another thing I just wanted to go back and touch on was Jamie mentioned getting approval, for using someone's picture in their story. I would also say if you consider writing your letter from your board president or one of your longtime volunteers, your letter doesn't always have to come from the executive director or, one of your staff members. It can come from your board president, somebody else. Of course, just make sure if you are going to do that, that they're involved in the process and feel comfortable with your plan and that they approve the final letter before it goes out. There was a question submitted previously asking how big a role Giving Tuesday should play in overall year-end strategy. I don't know if Cheryl or Allegra, you have any thoughts on that?
I can share just a couple real quick. So for Giving Tuesday, I consider where your organization is located too. There are definitely regional giving days too that happen at this time of year that can be even bigger than Giving Tuesday regionally. So, but I think what I usually advise organizations to do is pick one day to be a central point in your organization's campaign. And so that could be Giving Tuesday, but if that's just not going to work for your organization, it could be a different sort of day. Maybe it's an anniversary of your organization, or maybe it's an awareness day that is related to your mission, but pick one day where you're really trying to do a huge push, because that's a great way to engage donors, to really have a measure, to be able to say we're almost to our goal for this day, and then have the donations trickle in the next day too. But it's really nice to have one sort of main celebratory day as part of your campaign.
Year over year, I saw the question, if I can just jump in as we're wrapping here. I talked about prior year, and really it's plural, right? So last year was different. So look at multiple years. Think about how you looked. And someone may say we did better, right? But it's certainly, let's not acknowledge the pandemic and the times that we had last year, and really plan looking at a span if your organization's old enough to go back a couple of years.
And Cheryl and I had this conversation, with a client as well, is Giving Tuesday oftentimes just feels obligatory. And those are my words recapping the conversation.
Right.
But it feels obligatory, and oftentimes there isn't thought around it. So it becomes a little bit chaotic where you throw out some, obligatory Giving Tuesday campaign, and you're not prepared to get donations from that. So it adds then to your plate of what you already had planned for your end of year or an event or otherwise. And it can just kind of be like a one-off for you that maybe doesn't fit into your plan and your strategy. So I would encourage you also to think of it from that perspective as well, as how does it fit in? And if it does fit into your end of year planning, great. If it doesn't, I wouldn't see it as something that is unnecessary if it doesn't work for, what you have going, for the rest of the year. And then we had one other question. So I'd be interested, if anybody else wants to chime in, which is, what are people anticipating will be different for end of year this year versus last year?
I think that's a great question, and kind of the cop-out answer is we're not going to know until we see what comes in and what the results are. We know giving was up last year. We know that messaging around the pandemic was really powerful last year. I think the most important thing when you're thinking about your messaging and how we're going to kind of treat this strange year, we're still in the pandemic, but it's not as urgent or new as it felt last year, or maybe for many communities it still is quite as urgent, but maybe for your donors it doesn't feel as urgent, is to really be authentic about how the pandemic has impacted your organization, and to tell stories about what you've done to adapt and adjust, and really be resilient in the face of the pandemic, and kind of continue that messaging so your donors can really understand the full picture, and you're honest about the full picture there. And then I think we'll see some really interesting data on giving trends in the new year on how year-end giving shaped up compared to last year.
Also, I just really quickly, and we do have to wrap up, but I think that it is very important, especially without the in-person ability to connect, that you are finding important ways to connect with your donor base of support. So as many things that you can do before now, and asking for money is really important. If you have not connected with your donor base of support that often this year, to keep them updated on what is going on, to send them messaging, to tell those stories, make sure you're starting now and doing that, because when you go to ask for money, your ask will be one of many. And maybe those organizations have really been engaging on a regular basis. I think for a lot of organizations, not having the in-person pieces this year have been really difficult.
And I would just add to that I know I touched on this already and we all kind of have at this point, but I think phone calls this year are really going to be important. You know, people have been getting so many emails. People are also probably, you know, just based on what I've heard from people I know, are going to be traveling for the holidays, right? So maybe they miss your mailed letter. Maybe it comes, you know, right after they leave. Maybe they're just not checking their email as much, but they likely will pick up the phone. So I think just given that, you know, maybe people are traveling more this year and just the number of electronic communications that have come out, those phone call touch points are going to be extra important this year. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Our email addresses are here at the bottom. If you want to reach out to any of us, if you have additional questions, we will send out the recording. We will send out the presentation. So you will have all of this. And just let us know if there's anything else we can kind of guide you on as you think through end of year. And thank you, Allegra, and thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. This has
Thanks,
been great.
everyone.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for attending.
Great. Good luck.
Okay, bye guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Okay.
We'll debrief. I love a chance to just debrief and hear. I mean, so far the comments have been great. So whatever you hear, let us know. Like,
Share.
Cheryl, let us know what Allie says. Allegra,
I
if you
will.
had anybody on.
I had a couple of people messaging me. Good
Me
too.
feedback towards
Me
the
too.
end. So I'm like,
Good, good. Awesome. Okay.
Love it
excellent.
and
Thank you,
great
guys.
job. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Bye, Allegra. Thank you.
Thank you.